we're hearing about the net of suffering within which we constantly entangle ourselves. Youth is haunted by the goblins of worries and anxieties, which dance when the wisdom moon does not shine, and youth proceeds towards denser darkness of delusion. One's tongue, the faculty of speech, is overworked in the service of the common and uncultured folk here, and it grows debilitated. It's quite curious how speech, which is the means of communication, is often used to avoid communication, usually by people that talk a lot. It's not because they've got a lot to say, it's because they've got a lot to hide. They're trying to hide their inner emptiness, perhaps. In the meantime, poverty spreads its thousands of branches, yielding the fruits of unhappiness and hard labour. Yet greed, which is empty and insubstantial, and which is destructive of one's own spiritual elevation, continues to proclaim victory in the darkness of delusion. Stealthily the cat of senility catches the mouse of youth. So it's not just youth that has a load of problems, a load of anxieties and worries and so on. Every age that we get to reveals a new set of problems, a new set of circumstances that we somehow have to cope with. This creation is essenceless, yet it gains a false reality. It even grows the fruits of dharma, righteous living, and artha, pursuit of prosperity. This world, enveloped by the sky and endowed with the eyes of the sun and the moon, is upheld by the delusion of its substantiality. In the lake of this world appearance, lilies known as bodies blossom, and they are resorted to by the bees known as life forces. So we have this picture of a world which we believe is real. You might find it very hard to accept that the world's insubstantial. You might see yourself as a pragmatic realist. It's all pretty solid after all, isn't it? I had a little joke recently about, or a little laugh at the expense of the scientific theory of evolution, which seems to suggest that if you leave a small variety of molecules around long enough, they'll eventually get up, start fighting each other, they'll create beliefs in a supreme being, they'll do art, do science, they'll have sexual fantasies and all the rest of it. It seems like a totally ridiculous idea, doesn't it? And yet this is what science says. Originally there was just a lot of inert molecules, but somehow they get together and they become life, and then they become life and they start fighting and they start doing art, doing science, whatever. But that's not the full scientific story. It's actually about forces, isn't it? Forces of gravity, electrical and magnetic forces, and forces which exist within atoms, which hold atoms together. And what's a force? You can't see a force, you can't smell it, touch it. It's a completely non-sensory thing, isn't it? It's actually these forces which apparently bring the universe into existence. And science is about forces. It's not really about these molecules, which in themselves, if you look into them close enough, seem to be very, very insubstantial. So science actually tells us that the world is insubstantial. Molecules, atoms, are mainly empty space, and the bits which aren't empty space, we're going to be hard pressed to describe them as matter. In fact, E equals mc squared. This tells us that all matter is essentially energy, or it's got an energy equivalent. So everything is energy, it's forces. It's not a material universe we live in. This is the point of view of science. So what do you materialists say about that? Well, you might say that you know what your senses tell you. But I've gone into that in the past. And when you examine that closely, it doesn't really add up either. Vasishta continued, the decadent concept of the world existence lies imprisoned in the senses, bound by self-limitation and conditioning and by the powerful thread of hopes and desires. This world appearance is like a delicate creeper which constantly trembles in the wind of the movement of prana, or life force, and which constantly sheds all kinds of beings, abandoning them to their destruction. There are many noble people who have risen above the quagmire of this hell known as world existence, and, devoid of all doubt, rejoice for a little while. There are the divine beings who dwell like lotuses in the blue expanse of the firmament. In this creation, actions are like the lotus which is polluted by vain desire for the fruits of such actions, which is caught in the net of psychological conditioning, and which is endowed with the perfume of dynamism. But this world appearance is like a little fish which comes into being in this finite space, and which is soon swallowed by the obstinate and invincible old vulture known as Gautanta, the end or conclusion of action. Yet diverse scenes arise and cease day after day, as ripples and waves appear and disappear on the surface of the ocean. The potter known as time keeps all these revolving like the potter's wheel. Innumerable forests known as creation have been reduced to ashes by the forest fire known as time. Such is the state of this creation, but since the ignorant are bound fast to their own false notions, neither the transiency of the world nor the hard blow they suffer in their life is able to awaken them. This psychological conditioning or self-limitation persists during the whole world cycle, like the body of the chief of the gods, Indra. As if by accident, in the midst of all this, there occur divine manifestations in whom the purest nature is revealed.